Okay, so I've got the right bit of paper. No, that's still not the right bit. Shall I do Rebecca's instead? She can do mine. Okay, so yeah, picking 3 verses always a challenge, but these are the 3 for today. And my first one is from James 2, and I'm going to read through from 14 to 26 to give you some context for this. And it says, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep well and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." And this is something about a cat among the pigeons verse. We hear over and over again that we're saved by grace through faith. So what do we make of this? Does it mean that in fact our salvation is dependent on what we do as well? Some people have suggested that it does. I'm not so sure. I found an interesting comment on a blog post about this verse. The person commenting said this about the way people often look at this verse. "The problem here is a false dichotomy." And if you don't know what a false dichotomy is, it's putting 2 things opposite each other that aren't genuinely opposite each other, a false dichotomy. The problem here is a false dichotomy, a false division between works and faith. Faith is the synthesis of belief and action. You do not layer works on top of faith like you layer cheese on a pizza. Faith means trusting, and trust is revealed in action. I thought that's quite an interesting way of looking at it. We're not saved by our works. Rather, if we truly have faith, then works simply must follow. They're the evidence of our faith. It's all part of the package. If there are no works, then it suggests the faith is hollow and not real. I think this verse is useful for us as a periodic reminder. This would always be in my top 10. It's useful as a periodic reminder that we're saved by grace, but that we're saved for something. We rubbish that grace if we don't live it out. It's easy to wander off towards an easy life of saying we believe but acting contrary to this. This is why this verse needs to be in my toolkit. A pointy little verse I need to prod myself with occasionally. So my second one is Philippians 4, and I'll read verses 11 to 13. "I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through Him who gives me strength." For me, what jumps out when I was looking again at this verse is the word learned. I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. And I think that word learned is important here. It's not necessarily something automatic or easy, but it's something worth learning. How many of our problems in society are about discontent? I sometimes feel like I spend my whole life grumbling. We moan about the weather, we whinge about our jobs, we complain about other people complaining. Now, I'm not saying no one should feel unhappy about their circumstances sometimes, and it's okay to vocalise that as well. But if we look for an external fix from the world to how we feel, we will often be unsatisfied. If contentment lies in getting everything we want, in having everything go our own way, then we will never be content. Instead, we need to learn to be content, whatever the circumstances. I think that's an active and ongoing learning. And verse 13 tells us how we can achieve this. We can pray and draw on God's strength, but we have to act and we have to decide it's a lesson we want to learn and keep working at it. So my final one, back to James. If I had to pick my favourite book, it would be James. And it's mostly because it's quite difficult, actually, and it kind of gives you a prod and a poke, and it does face sometimes. And James 1, verse 19. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And this is another of these verses I need to read over and over and over and over and over again. Note that it doesn't rule out becoming angry. There can be a time and a place to be angry, in my view. I think being angry with social injustice, I think that's okay. However, while we should be quick to listen, by contrast we should be slow to speak and slow to anger. We need to consider our words and consider our anger, not just flare up, spit out angry words like a flamethrower, leaving devastation in our wake. Listen again, consider. If I could learn to listen more, give people the benefit of the doubt more, explore what they really mean, rather than forgetting to listen, assuming I know what they mean, assuming the worst, and getting angry and speaking unwisely, then I would be a better person. And my wife would be much happier.
I feel like I've cheated, and my first verse is actually 4 or 5 from Luke 4 verses 17 to 21. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." This has been a favourite piece of scripture of mine since I wrote an essay on it last year. I love it because it's actually a passage about Jesus shattering people's expectations and revealing a message of redemption to the oppressed. In Luke's Gospel, this story about Jesus sits right at the beginning, and it acts as a kind of manifesto for the rest of his ministry. Jesus reads from the prophet Isaiah, which would have been a much loved text of the Jewish people that he's addressing in this instance. He declares the prophecy has been fulfilled, however it wasn't in the way that they were expecting. The Jewish audience in Nazareth thought the prophecy was going to be for their own people. And Jesus kind of turns it around, flips it on its head, and reveals this wider purpose and mission. The promise was to be for all people, and particularly to those who've been cast aside by the rest of society. And later on in the passage, which I haven't read out, he uses some proverbs which would also have been well known by the Jewish people. And it brings further home the point that Jesus' message was for the Gentiles and for all of the people, not just the Jews. And this made them quite angry. I think in that situation, Jesus was a real prophetic voice into that community, and I think there's a lot that we can learn from that now. There's a great American theologian and scholar called Walter Brueggemann, and he talks about how a prophet is interested in the future as it affects the present. It's not just about Jesus telling a fortune and saying this is something that's going to happen, but actually it's something that's relevant to them right now. And he says that the task of prophetic ministry is to nurture, nourish, and evoke a consciousness and perception alternative to the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us. So the people were saying that they wanted the message to be insular and closed in for them, and Jesus comes and is a voice that proclaims a message that's really different. And through that, he then responds peacefully to the people's anger, but he stands his ground. And I think to me, it's been really important in realising that often Jesus' message reaches wider than we might think it does. My second verse kind of links on from this, and it's taken from Luke chapter 10, verse 29. Just to give you a bit of context, Jesus has been asked by a teacher of the law what he must do to inherit eternal life. Jesus tells him he must love God and love his neighbour, very similar to in the Mark passage that Mum read out earlier. Then the next verse says this: the teacher of the law replied, but he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbour? The story that follows is one of the Good Samaritan, which might be familiar with you. But just this one verse, when I was reading it just the other day, really resonated with me immediately. Because I think so often I'm like the teacher of the law, and I'm trying to justify and to make loopholes in my calling to love others. And is that person really my neighbour? And I find that person really difficult to be around, so does it really matter? I think we find ways to justify the things that we're neglecting to do. And I justify to myself, I don't need to do anything about the sex-trafficked worker in Thailand who's made my clothes, because they're far removed. And surely that's to do with the company who's making the clothes, or the people doing the trafficking. And so, I don't really do anything. Or I ignore the person I find difficult to be around, because I'd rather spend time with people whose company I find easy. I justify not getting involved in local politics when my next door neighbour's house, who she's lived in for 50 years, is being knocked down. Because what difference can I make when I'm just one person? But I think that my claim that I follow Jesus is unsubstantiated if I'm not extending love to the neighbour. And I think this story reveals that my neighbour is likely to be the person that I'm trying to get out of loving. And it's a bit of a wake-up call to me that actually I haven't chosen to follow an easy life, but I'm drawn into a love and a grace that compels me to love others with as much of that love and as much of that grace as I know how. And so this is a constant inspiration for me, I think, to take little steps to trying to love my neighbour more fully. I'm ending on a bit of a cheerier and also shorter note. This is from Genesis 1, verse 16. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and a lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. I just love this verse because it's almost like it's just a casual, flippant thing in the middle of this whole creation narrative where God is making everything. It's like, oh, he also made the stars. No big deal, no biggie. But the stars are so huge and so vast. I looked this up on the internet because I'm not that much of a science guru, but apparently the sun is 149.6 million kilometres away from Earth, and its radius is 695,700 kilometres. That is impossibly big to imagine. And I think it's really helpful for me to remember that I have a God who is so big and so complex and so amazing, but also a God who cares about relationship and who loves me and who cares about me. And that's, I think, just a real, astonishing thing to remember, that God is so big and yet so caring and so loving, and all of that, I think, is just amazing, really.
You can tell she's the one studying theology as part of her course, can't you? So 3 of my favourites then. I'm choosing 2 verses from Philippians 4. So this is Paul writing to the church at Philippi, who have clearly been very supportive of him, and this is at the ending of his letter. He seems to try and end it a number of times, and he must keep remembering extra things he wants to tell them, wants to add in. So when I did my top 10 a few years ago, verse 8 from Philippians 4 was in it. This time it's verse 9 that I want to focus on. But I'll start with verse 8 to give you the context. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. This is brilliant. Learn something and do something with it. Put it into practice. Some versions say, and practice it. Practice these things. Do what it says. Practice these things, and the peace of God will be with you. There's a concept in psychology called cognitive dissonance, which means the state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioural decisions and attitude change. In other words, cognitive dissonance is when the things that we do are at odds with the things that we think and believe in. They make us uncomfortable with ourselves when we have that cognitive dissonance. When we listen to the things that God says to us and put those beliefs into practice, God gives us peace. The God of peace will be with us. We no longer have cognitive dissonance of doing one thing while believing in the other. The God of peace is with us. The other verse from this chapter that I want to share with you today is verse 12. Now, those of you who are paying attention will realise that Otten has already done this verse. Being really organised, we only checked last night that our verses didn't overlap. And we thought about changing verses because we have a number of others that are in our top 10. But we decided we had different thoughts about it, so we keep it in. So I'm just going to read it out again. I'm going a little bit further back than Martin. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I think that this is the way to happiness, to manage to learn to be content in all circumstances. But I find this one a challenge. It's something I aspire to, but don't always meet. But one of the ways I think that we can be content in all circumstances is to try and be grateful for what we have in all those circumstances. It can be tricky, but again, psychologists report that a 5-minute-a-day gratitude journal can increase your long-term well-being by more than 10%. And to put that into context, that is the equivalent impact on your life as doubling your income has. It's a lot easier to get that 5 minutes a day than to double your income. Having an attitude of gratitude, being content in all things, can make us happier. And when we're happier, we tend to be more effective. So those have both been fairly long-term verses for me, but this next one is brand new. Martin and I have been doing the Bible reading in a year on our phones, on an app on our phones. Now, at the moment, I'm about 12 days behind with it, so I'm not very good at keeping on top, and we keep kind of resetting our dates, so I think it's probably going to take us 2 years to do rather than a year, but we will get there eventually. But one of the things I really like about it is you get a proverb every day. And I've really, really enjoyed reading through the Proverbs like that, one bit a day. And the one that's really stuck out to me in the last week is this one, Proverbs 16, verse 24. Kind words are like honey, sweet to the soul and healthy for the body. Honey's got many health benefits. It's a natural antibiotic. It works against the bad stuff. And kind words do the same thing for our souls. When people say kind words to us, they build us up. They make us feel better. And as such, they make us do better. When we say kind things to other people, it makes us feel better too, knowing that we're building people up and making them feel better. So we're going to bring our service to an end soon. I'm going to ask Rick to come back, and Rebecca, and Martin, and do another couple of songs for us.